Hello, my name is Becky Lancaster, and I work for Uplift, which is Wyoming's Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health Services. I am also the parent and grandparent of children with special needs. As a family, we've navigated the special ed system, the developmental disability system, and the healthcare system. On behalf of Wyoming Family to Family Health Information Center, which is a collaboration between Wyoming Institute for Disabilities and Uplift, we are here today to bring you a presentation on the importance of developmental milestones for you and your child with special health care needs. And I would also like to turn it over to Dr. McLean to introduce himself.
Thanks, Becky. I'm Bill McLean. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Institute for Disabilities. I'm a licensed psychologist in Wyoming, and I'm also a professor of psychology here at the University of Wyoming. And I'm pleased to be here today to talk about developmental milestones. So we've prepared some material that we're going to go through, and then Becky and I are going to talk about some questions, frequent questions that parents have about developmental milestones. When we're talking about development, we're talking about change. Sometimes people refer to change in children, for example, in terms of growth. And for the purposes of this talk today, growth is going to refer to changes in physical characteristics, things apparent when looking at the body, such as height, weight, head circumference, and sexual maturation. What I'm going to focus on, however, is development, which is defined as characteristic and predictable ways that behavior changes during the human life cycle. Development follows a similar pathway for all children, regardless of individual life experiences or cultures. Let's think about what some milestones are, and I've listed here for you some common ones. Smiling for the very first time. Newborns do not smile spontaneously. You have to wait, and it sometimes takes a while for them to get around to it. But smiling for the first time is an important milestone. Waving bye-bye. Walking independently is one that is easily observable. Saying mama or dada. Oftentimes parents think of that in a sort of a competitive way, that is he going to say mama or dada first. The occurrence of stranger anxiety is another early social emotional milestone. And pretend play. Because milestones like these, as well as many others, occur at relatively specific ages, they provide a way to track children's developmental progress over time. So let's look at some milestones with that particular framework, that is, particular ages at which they occur. At 8 months of age, for example, children turn their head when they hear their name. They smile back when someone smiles at them, so-called social smiling. And they enjoy playing games like peekaboo. At 18 months of age, children engage in simple pretend play. They point to an interesting object, and they speak in single words without prompting. At 24 months of age, a child speaks in 2 to 4 word phrases, can follow simple instructions, and points to objects or pictures when named. Now let's look at the variability or differences in when children can attain a particular developmental milestone. And for this example, I'm using walking independently. So that means that the child's not cruising on furniture, their hand is not being held, they're actually walking upright without any assistance. As you can see from this particular graph, it runs along the 0 line there at the very bottom until about 8 months, and it starts to increase around 9 months, reflecting that in this sample of children, there were some children as young as 9 months of age who started to walk independently. And you can see that increasingly the numbers of children who actually are walking independently increases every month thereafter, up to the point where it reaches 100% of infants at about 14 and a half to 15 months. So if we look at that, I mean, there's some variability, right, between the time where kids first start to walk, around 9 months, and there's sort of an upper end as well. And that's what's graphed here for you and plotted those lines. The solid line reflects where 50% of the children in this sample actually started walking independently, which was between 11 and 12 months of age. And 90% of the children passed this particular milestone slightly more than 14 months of age. So with this information, we can describe early walkers and late walkers. So everybody attained that particular milestone, but at different times. Similarly, there are milestones related to language and communication. For example, children vary in attaining their first spoken word. Approximately 25% of children have a first word by 10 months, 75% by 14 months, and 90% by 15 months. With this information, we can describe early talkers and late talkers.
And I think also important about communication, obviously we're talking about first words, but I think it's important with developmental milestones that parents understand that communication with babies start at birth. Crying is a form of communication, pointing and gesturing. Some children actually learn sign language before they actually use a spoken word. So I think it's important that families or parents kind of just key into how the child is communicating, and that's a good foundation for when they do start with the first word.
Right. Becky, that was a good segue into the next slide, which talks about milestone moments, which is a booklet that is made available by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and we are including it as part of our materials for the Family to Family Health Information Center. This particular booklet is something that parents can use to track their child's development as he or she plays, learns, speaks, and acts. Milestone Moments is a useful guidebook of child development that provides not only information about developmental milestones and the ages at which they typically appear, but also some useful activities that parents and other caregivers can use to foster their children's development. It's organized by several different domains at each age group. One of them has to do with movement and physical development. One has to do with language and communication, the point that you were making, social, emotional, and also cognitive, like learning, thinking, and problem solving. So very useful in terms of providing information about what to expect and how to promote development in children. Sometimes children do not achieve milestones at the expected times. The difference in timing is also described as a delay. All children develop at their own rate, and using the example that I presented earlier of walking independently, a child who begins walking at 18 months of age is said to be 6 months delayed for that developing skill. Developmental checklists provide a way of tracking milestones, assessing whether a child is on target, and determining whether a comprehensive developmental evaluation may be necessary. Some examples of those measures are the Denver Developmental Screening Test, the Ages and Stages Questionnaire, the Battelle Developmental Inventory Screening Tool, and the Child Development Inventory. Parents are in a great place to observe their children and are usually very sensitive to apparent differences. So how would you detect a problem? Well, first of all, by connecting early with your child, being a good observer of how they play, learn, speak, and act. And I think you had some further thoughts about that as well, Becky.
Well, I think it's important with parents maybe to give them some ideas on some things that they could do. So number one is we encourage parents to, get babies out of car seats. Car seats were developed for cars, for transportation, but it also inhibits movement, it inhibits language. So getting the babies out of the car seats, getting the babies out of the swings, getting the babies down on the floor, so putting a blanket on the floor and doing some really productive floor time so they can move and stretch and work on their motor patterns. We encourage parents to, one of the funnest things to do is to get on the floor with your baby and blow bubbles. It's very easy to do. It helps the baby track. Oftentimes they'll start reaching out for the bubbles, so you're getting a lot of motor planning going. Music, introducing the child to music. Things as simple as being in a car when they're in their car seats, talking to them and saying, oh, there's a cow. What does the cow do? That all builds language and communication. It's important, we call it pairing language with object. So you're giving them a word and you're pairing that with an object, which increases their ability to understand meaning of language, and it's also a great bonding activity. We encourage parents to not have televisions on when they're interacting with their children, because it's very distracting and it breaks down on that, and kids don't need to be in front of the TV all the time, or the computers, or the video games. And kind of last, I would just like parents to really consider, if you are interacting with your child, to put your cell phones up. I've, been in schools where I've seen parents pick their kids up, and the parent is on the phone, and so there's really no even interaction with the child getting in the car, because mom or dad is on a cell phone talking to somebody else. So it's really important, if we want to, observe how they play, learn, speak, and act, we really just have to be engaged and paying attention and giving them lots of opportunities to try different things and to observe the world.
Great. What we're suggesting is that if you suspect a problem, that you should act early. If your child's development seems to slow down, or they lose a particular skill like walking or talking, then you should seek advice from a professional. Most of the time, a developmental problem is not something that a child will grow out of on their own. And remember to have fun with your child. So I think we're going to have some questions for one another at this point. So
we do. I had a question from a parent who said, my sister's little girl is about the same age as my little boy, or my son, and I noticed that my niece started talking in sentences a few months before my son. So what does that mean? Should I worry about it? Is that normal?
It's a frequent observation, Becky, and I think a lot of families will talk about the fact that girls do seem to develop language more quickly than boys, and boys seem to develop motor skills more quickly than girls. The differences are usually not very large, but they are noticeable and could cause some concern. I think it's that same issue that I talked about earlier, is that if you notice that development was slowing, or that the child lost a skill, then that would be a time to contact a professional.
Okay.
One of the questions that folks might have in listening to this particular talk is, if they have concerns that their child has perhaps a developmental delay, whom can they contact in their state to gain a developmental assessment?
That's a really good question. The great thing about Wyoming is we have 14 regional developmental preschools, and by law they're all mandated to provide what's called child find. So they have to do basically assessments on kids, and it can be screens, it can be full evaluations depending on what the child needs, what the professionals say they need. They do them, you'll see advertisements around town where they're doing like a citywide screening, but you can call your local developmental preschool anytime and schedule one. And it's at no cost to the parents, which is a really important thing to know. And usually they will look at fine motor, gross motor, communication, and learning. So if you have any concerns about your child's development, or even if they're staying caught up, we really would like to see all kids get screened. Even if you don't have concerns, it's a good baseline.
Okay. Screening tests really do provide a lot of useful information and can oftentimes indicate how much of a delay is present. The measures tend to be brief, but they really give a good idea of whether the delay is present and a strong possibility if there is a delay in which particular areas. So then that would trigger what's called a comprehensive developmental evaluation. Those tests that they use in those evaluations take a much closer look at child development and are better at describing the nature of the delays, if present, and to provide information on how you can help your child catch up. So I guess from what you said, it sounds like the developmental centers are in a position to offer both screening and the comprehensive evaluations.
They are, and I think it's important for parents to know that they can make those appointments. Sometimes parents think they have to wait for a referral from their pediatrician or from someone else. So as a parent, you can call and make those appointments and have those screenings done.
I think that's an important point because the literature does say that if there is a problem, it's important to get your child help as soon as possible.
So another question that we had from a parent was, I know my child has a developmental delay. I get tired of looking at information about typical development, the developmental milestones for typically developing kids, because it just reminds me that he's behind where he should be. So what good is this information to me because I already know that my child is delayed?
That's a good question, and I'm sure it can be irritating to be confronted with yet another reminder that your child's delayed in meeting particular developmental milestones. The value of guides like Milestone Moments, as I mentioned earlier, is that it provides you with a description of skills and abilities that your child will be attaining next, and regardless of the delay. And it also gives you some information about ways that you can help your child develop those skills, whether they be social emotional or cognitive, communication, motor skills, and it probably would be something that would be a part of an early intervention program as well. So I can understand why it would be frustrating and irritating to be reminded, but it's really, if you think about child development as being universal and that all children go through the same relative stages with regard to their development, a book like this can really help you anticipate what will be next and how to get your child to that point.
Okay, so kind of on those same lines, so if a child does have a developmental delay, is it permanent?
Not necessarily. Many developmental delays are temporary and respond to early intervention provided by trained professionals. I was interested in a study that I read a few years ago where they did a 25-year follow-up of a group of children who were being treated in an early intervention program at UCLA, University of California at Los Angeles. And the range was really amazing. I mean, there were children with very significant limitations who were required special education, and there were children that had been identified as having developmental delays who were in college. So it's a really useful category, that is developmental delay, because it does provide services, and there's not a universal outcome. So I think it's a tried and true way of fostering all children's development.
Thank you. So Dr. McLean and I would like to thank each of you for listening to us today as we talked about this really important topic, and we would just encourage parents, if you have any questions or comments, you're free to log on to the Wyoming Family to Family Health Information Center website, and we would encourage you to call your local developmental preschools if you have any questions for screening. Okay.
Thank you very much.